Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started, and if other folks show up, they can trickle in as is their wont. So, we'll get started in just a second after my non-introduction introduction. And we're going to be starting with Psalm 51 in the Orthodox Study Bible, 52 otherwise. And so my non-introduction introduction, again, primarily for anybody who might listen to this online, is I'm not going to go through and introduce the whole book of Psalms again. If you listen to either of the first two, which are posted online, either of the first two Bible studies on Psalms, I went through it twice, the second time shorter. So you can go back and refer to that if you'd like. But we're going to go ahead and just get started and see how many we can get through tonight. I'm prepared to do as many as 17.
Let's don't get carried away.
I said I'm prepared to do as many as 17. I didn't say we were going to do 17. I just said I am prepared to do as many as 17. Okay.
Make up for next week, right?
Yeah, probably a few weeks, yeah. So Psalm 51, Orthodox Study Bible, 52 otherwise. When Doeg the Edomite came and reported to Saul and said, David went to the house of Abimelech. I'm not sure why in the Orthodox Study Bible they didn't make that part of the italicized prescript, because that's really what it is. You know, it's a Psalm of David that he wrote when Doeg the Edomite came into it. For some reason, the way they typeset it, they made it look like the first verse is when Doeg the Edomite. But so the actual first verse is technically here verse 3 in the Orthodox Study Bible. Why do you boast in evil, O mighty man, and in lawlessness all the day long? Your tongue devises wrongdoing, your work deceit like a sharpened razor. You love evil rather than good, wickedness rather than speaking righteousness. You love all the words of destruction, you love a deceitful tongue. Therefore God shall destroy you completely. He shall pluck you up and remove you from your dwelling, and uproot you from the land of the living. The righteous also shall see and fear, and shall laugh at him, saying, Behold, this man did not make God his helper, but hoped in the abundance of his riches, and he was made powerful in his vanity. But I am like a fruitful olive tree in the house of God. I hope in God's mercy, forever and unto ages of ages. I will give thanks to you forever for what you did, and I will wait on your name, for it is good in the sight of your holy ones. So a couple things here. First thing, we've seen this before. We have a description again of a wicked person. What's interesting about this description, though, and is important for us in our view of sin, a lot of times when we talk about our own sin, even when we go to confession, we sort of talk about sin as if, well, I was trying really, really hard to be good and do everything right, and oops, right? I did something bad, you know. That's how we portray it. I'm really a good guy, you know.
The devil made
But I
you
did
do
it. Yeah, or the devil made me do it, yeah. Whereas the reality of sin is, right? The reality of sin is, verse 5, you love evil rather than good, wickedness rather than speaking righteousness. When we're going out and sinning, at least when I'm going out and sinning, it's usually not really accidental. I might try and claim later that it was accidental. But when I'm going out and sinning, I'm usually doing something I want to do. I'm doing something that at the time I think is going to be great, right? That I'm going to enjoy, right? That's why I'm choosing to do it, right? And I usually, while I'm choosing to do it, know it's wrong and I shouldn't be doing it. But I do it anyway, right? That's the reality of how we actually sin. After the fact, we come back and say, well, I was trying not to. You know,
sometimes I find myself asking God for forgiveness before I even finish sinning.
Well,
Okay, James.
better than the alternative. That's what,
Hope he's listening.
yeah. But so this is something we have to own up to. This is part of, you know, when we talk about repentance, so we have to accept that God's judgment of what we did is true. We have to own up to it. When we come to confess our sins, we have to own up and say, I went and I chose to do this. Right? Rather than try to make excuses like I didn't really want to, or the devil made me do it, or I wouldn't have, but, or, if I just to give you enough explanation, it'll all make sense and it really wasn't that bad. Right? Because that's not the truth.
Trying to justify.
Yeah. The truth is, when we sin, we know what we're going to do is wrong. But we want to do it anyway, and so we do. And so we have to own up to that. We have to own up to that. The second piece here that's interesting is, you notice that, and we talked about before how, like God with Israel, when he was sending them into exile, we talked about how God said to Israel, you guys are supposed to be an example to all the other nations. Right? And when they went out and sinned, God comes and says he's going to punish them as an example to all the other nations. Right? He said, if you won't be a good example, I'll use you as a bad example. Right? And so we see that that's what ultimately happens to this wicked man. This wicked man becomes a bad example. But notice the response of the righteous man. Right? They see in fear, but then they laugh at him. Right? That seems kind of mean. Right? Well, the point isn't that we should laugh at people when they go to their own destruction. The point is, what they're laughing at is the silliness of the way the wicked man's mind worked. Right? That he didn't trust in God, but he hoped in the abundance of his riches. And he was made powerful by his vanity. Right? The idea that trusting in our own devices, trusting in the wealth we've accumulated in this life, right, thinking ourselves to be great, is laughable. It's silly. If you really think about it, when I die, it's not going to matter how much money I accumulated in the bank. It's not going to do me any good. Right? It doesn't matter how great I thought I was. It's not going to do me any good. So it's silly, is the idea. Not that we should laugh at people, but that we should realize how ridiculous that way of thinking is. Right. And then the last thing I want to note is in verse 11, you notice the two pieces. I will give thanks to you forever for what you did, and I will wait on your name, for it is good in the sight of your holy ones. So this is, we're at a different point in history than David. Right? So when David is talking about giving thanks to God for what he did, he's primarily, first and foremost, talking about probably the Exodus, right? For bringing the people out of Egypt, giving Israel the land. And when he says, wait on your name, he's waiting for what's going to come next, which is Christ, right? For us, we're at a different point in history, but we still, and this is the structure of all of our worship, we give thanks to God for what he did, right, in Christ's death and resurrection, redeeming us. And then we wait on his name, what he's going to do next. Resurrection from the dead. So we're at this point in between. And so that's summarizing that point, that we give thanks to God for what he's already done for us, and we look forward to what that means he's going to do for us in the future. Okay. Does anybody have any questions about that? Go to the next one. Okay. So Psalm 52, Orthodox Study Bible 53, otherwise. The fool said in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt and abominable in lawlessness. There is none who does good. God looked from heaven upon the sons of men to see if there were any who understood or sought God. All turned aside, they were altogether rendered useless. There is none who does good, not even one. Do all the workers of lawlessness not know? They eat up my people as they eat bread and do not call upon God. They were in great fear where no fear was, for God scattered the bones of men-pleasers. They were put to shame because God scorned them. Who will bring the salvation of Israel out of Zion, when God brings back the captivity of his people? Jacob will greatly rejoice, and Israel will be glad. There's a couple interesting things about this. First of all, notice David wrote this. And what's he writing about? Who will bring the salvation of Israel out of Zion, when God brings back the captivity of his people? Right? So he's predicting, he's speaking prophetically. He's talking about the captivity of God's people, right? The exile isn't going to start for another 425 years, roughly. Is it going to start? He's talking about it ending. When is salvation going to come out of Zion? After God ends the captivity of his people. So ultimately, the salvation he's talking about is Christ. When is that salvation going to come? After the end of the exile. So he's talking about things that haven't even, prophetically about things that haven't even started yet. Okay. And then the first part, we talked before about, this quote that we're going to see a lot. We're going to see it a lot in Proverbs too. The fool says in his heart there is no God. And we talked before about how that's not talking about atheists the way we think of them today. Because there weren't any atheists like we have them today at this time in history. There wasn't anybody who didn't think there were no gods at all. Right? So the idea here is the fool says in his heart there is no God really means the fool says in his heart that he's going to be able to get away with his evil actions. Right? Because we see it continues. There's none who does good. It talks about the wickedness of men. So the idea is, it's sort of the fool thinks to himself, I can get away with this. There's not going to be any justice. There's not going to be any consequences. God doesn't know what I'm doing. He's not going to hold me accountable. Right? And that's what makes him a fool, because of course God is. St. Paul refers to verses 2 through 4 in Romans when he's talking about the Gentiles primarily. He's talking about all the peoples of the earth, right? Because we get this image of God looking down from heaven, looking around, trying to find someone who's out there trying to do good or trying to seek him, right? Why? Well, because we've talked about before, God's looking to save people. God's not looking to punish and condemn people. God's looking to save people. So he's looking around trying to find somebody, right? Somebody out there who's trying to do good, trying to seek God. Unfortunately, he doesn't find anybody, right? And when St. Paul quotes that in Romans, he's talking to a group of Gentiles in Rome who have become Christians now, right? And he's talking to them about their life before they became Christians. And he's talking about the fact, we sometimes, you'll get asked the question, right? You get asked the question, well, what about the guy who lives in the island in the South Pacific, who's never heard about Christianity, who's never heard about God, right? He lives and he dies not ever knowing about the scriptures about God, right? What happens to him, right? Because he isn't, and that's based on this flawed. First of all, it's a flawed view of who God is, because you'll have some people answer that question by saying he goes to hell because he doesn't believe in Jesus, right? Even though he had no way to find out about Jesus, he didn't believe in Jesus, and so he goes to hell, right? Well, that's a God who's looking around for people to smack, right? It's kind of just trying to condemn people. We don't have a God like that, right? Okay, but then the flip side is the assumption that goes into this. That is, this man living on this island is really good and is really seeking God, right? And even though this man is really good at seeking God, God chooses not to reveal himself to him, right? And the point being, that doesn't happen. That doesn't happen. Okay. So St. Paul is saying to those Romans, when you were pagans before, okay, you weren't these virtuous, wonderful, noble savages out there doing good and looking for God, these wonderful people, right? Who finally, because of how good you were, God chose to reveal himself to you in Jesus Christ. No. He's saying, you guys had gone completely astray, right? Like I said, all turned aside. They were altogether rendered useless, right? You were out there worshiping idols. You were out there sinning like crazy, right? And that's when God chose to save you in Jesus Christ. That's when God chose to save you in Jesus Christ. And revealed himself to you. And so it's important we keep that in mind when we're asked those questions. Right? Because what the Orthodox Church teaches is God is, as St. Paul says, God is a rewarder of those who earnestly seek him. If there is someone out there who is seeking God, God will certainly reveal himself to that person. Right? And God holds us accountable for what he gives us. He doesn't hold us accountable for what he didn't give us. Right? So he's not going to blame this guy living on the island for not being a member of the Orthodox Church. If there was no Orthodox Church within 500 miles of the island, right? That's not going to happen. Okay? Now, if there is an Orthodox Church on the island, and they're preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ to him, and he says, nuts to that, I won't go live my life the way I want to, now we're in a whole different story. Right? But so we need to keep it, that situation doesn't exist. Right? And we need to be honest with ourselves too. Right? Like we talked about in the last psalm, you know, we're not these noble, wonderful people either. You know, we're going out and seeking God, and God isn't rewarding us for how good we've been. When God sends us blessings, he's blessing us despite how bad we've been. And that's one of the reasons why we need to be so thankful to him all the time, is because we haven't earned any of it that he's given us. We don't deserve how good he's been to us. And we see there's a contrast there in verse 6. It says, God scattered the bones of men pleasers. Scattering the bones, that's a curse. That means they didn't have a burial. Right? They didn't get to have a burial. Their bones were just scattered. Right? There's this contrast between those who seek to please God and those who seek to please other men. Right? Who seek to get ahead. Seek to get ahead of this life versus those who seek to please God. So Psalm 53, Orthodox Study Bible 54 otherwise. The first verse there is, save me, O God, in your name, and judge me in your power. A version of which is the prokimenon for Vespers on Wednesday evening. Save me, it's usually translated in our liturgy book, save me, O God, by thy name, and judge me by thy strength. And, O God, hear my prayer, give ear to the words of my mouth, for strangers rise up against me, and the powerful seek after my soul, they have not set God before them. For behold, God is my helper, the Lord is the protector of my soul. He will return evils to my enemies, utterly destroy them in your truth. I will sacrifice to you voluntarily, I will give thanks to your name, O Lord, for it is good. You delivered me from all my afflictions, and my eye looked upon my enemies. So a couple things. We've seen a lot of psalms like this before, so we'll do this one relatively quick. But this psalm is part of the prayers that are prayed at noontime, also known as the 6th hour. The church services, the hours, are the 1st, 3rd, 6th, and 9th hour. And that's not how we're used to telling time. We have a little more sophisticated. But in the ancient world, the way they measured time was based on sunrise. Okay, so they started at sunrise. First hour was 1 hour after sunrise. Okay, so it's usually, when we do it now, we've sort of normalized it. So like if you go to a monastery, if you went to a monastery in the year 500, right? When the sun came up, they'd do Mass, right? Whenever the sun rose. And then 1 hour after the sun rose, usually around the end of Matins, they do first hour. And then 3 hours after the sun rose, they do third hour. 6 hours after the sun rose, they do 6th hour. 9 hours, they do 9th hour, and then they'd usually do Vespers at sunset. All right, so it's just based on the sun. If you go to a monastery today, they've normalized that. So matins is usually around 6. First hour is usually 7 a.m. Third hour is 9 a.m. And sixth hour is noon. And ninth hour is 3 in the afternoon. Okay. So these 6-hour prayers are in modern use, and basically, depending on when the sun rose, in ancient use around noontime. That's when people would take their midday meal, was it at 6 hour.
Then at dark, the clock stops. Basically, at the monastery, and everybody goes to bed, then they get back up at dawn and they start.
Well, actually, they get up at midnight, in the middle of the night.
What they getting up there for?
To do the midnight.
6 was all about.
To do the midnight office.
Oh.
There's also compline in there right before they go to sleep. So monks do a lot of praying, but they get up in the middle of the night.
Do they do any farming in between services?
Yes, that's what they did in between services. So yeah, monks traditionally would only sleep from after the midnight office until matins
Next
in the morning. So you're looking at about 5 hours on average a night. The rest of the time in between, in the evenings in between services, they're doing their private prayers, and in the daytime between the services, they're doing work. Whatever their assigned work is. So, yeah, being a monk isn't just wearing a robe and being single and living in a big dorm. There's a lot of praying and a lot of work. It's not an easy life at all, by any means. But so 6 hour, that is to say, is around noontime. 6th hour is also when Christ died. It's when Christ died. Remember, he was hung on the cross at the 3rd hour. Right, at 6th hour. Then at 9th hour is when they went to go and break the legs. They found he was already dead. So the 6th hour, these psalms that are read at 6th hour, which are basically the next 3, Psalm 53, 54, and 55, are all connected in terms of the church's understanding with Christ's crucifixion. They're also read during Holy Week on Wednesday and Thursday and Friday, these 3 psalms regarding Christ's crucifixion. So when it talks about the powerful seek after my soul and they have not set God before them, right? It's talking about those who came to kill Christ, right? The Sanhedrin, Pilate, those who are in positions of authority. This reverence, you delivered me from all my afflictions and my eye looked upon my enemies. That my eye looked upon my enemies means I outlasted them, right? I outlived them. So that's a reference to Christ's resurrection, right? That even though they thought they had been victorious over them, he in fact outlasted them, right? And Caiaphas is dead, and they found his tomb in Jerusalem, and Christ is not. So,
What is the tomb that they're always trying to look for?
Alexander the Great.
What's that?
Alexander the Great.
There was somebody else that they're always talking about, somebody's tomb.
They found Caiaphas' tomb, who was the high priest. His family crypt in Jerusalem. That's the most recent big find like that. So, okay, so now Psalm 54, Orthodox Study Bible 55 otherwise. This again, before we start reading, this again is one of those psalms that's read at the 6th hour and that's read in Holy Week regarding Christ's crucifixion. Give ear to my prayer, O God, and do not despise my supplication. Attend to me and hear me. I am vexed in my prayer and troubled by the enemy's voice and by the sinner's affliction. For they turned their lawlessness upon me, and in wrath they were indignant with me. My heart was troubled within me, and the terror of death fell on me. Fear and trembling came upon me, and the darkness covered me. I said, who will give me wings like a dove, and I will fly away and be at rest? Behold, I fled far away and lodged in the wilderness. I wait for the one who saves me from faint-heartedness and storm. Drown them in the sea, O Lord, and divide their tongues. For I see lawlessness and strife in the city. Day and night it shall surround her upon her walls. Lawlessness and trouble and wrongdoing are in her midst. And usury and treachery have not ceased from her squares. For if an enemy reviled me, I would have endured it. And if one hating me boasted against me, I would have hidden from him. But it was you, a man my equal, my guide and my friend, who together with me sweetened our meals. In God's house we walked in unity. Let death come upon them, and let them go down alive into Hades, because evils are in their dwellings in the very midst of them. But I cried out to God, and the Lord heard me. Evening and morning and midday I shall tell, I shall proclaim, and he will hear my voice. He will redeem my soul in peace from those who draw near to me, for they were with me in abundance. God shall hear and humble them, he who exists before the ages. For there is no change in them, and they have not feared God. He stretched forth his hand in punishment, they defiled his covenant. They were scattered by the wrath of his face, and his heart drew near. His words were softened above oil, and they are arrows. Cast your care upon the Lord, and he shall support you. He will never allow the righteous to be moved. But you, O God, will bring them down into the pit of decay. Men of blood and deceit shall not live even half their days. But I will hope in you, O Lord. Okay. So you notice the reference, verse 14 and 15. That's taken to be a reference to Judas. Right? That it wasn't just some stranger, but that Christ was betrayed by someone who was his friend, who he'd eaten with, who he'd gone into the temple and prayed with. I remember last time we talked about these references to God's city. These references to God's city. We talked about how at the time those were psalms that were written after the exile. Right? So they weren't talking about Jerusalem because Jerusalem was a heap of rubble. Right? We talked about how God's city is eternal, the place where God dwells. Well, here we talked about St. Augustine in his book, The City of God, or his work, The City of God, talking about that idea. Well, we see the other city here, right? In verse 10, drown them in the sea, O Lord, and divide their tongues, for I see lawlessness and strife in the city. Day and night it shall surround her, upon her walls lawlessness and trouble and wrongdoing are in her midst. This is a psalm that David wrote. So he's just founded Jerusalem as the new capital at the time he's writing this. All right? So his brand new capital that he's founded as his city is what? Full of lawlessness and strife and blood and usury and treachery. Well, why does he do something about it? He's the king, for Pete's sake. Because that's not the city he's talking about. Right? He's not talking about that literal city. Right? We talked about St. Augustine's work, City of God. He contrasted the city of God with the city of man. The city of man. And it's that city that David is talking about here prophetically. Right? Remember when Cain and Abel, we read the story of Cain and Abel. Right? Cain kills Abel. Right? God comes to him. And Cain says, you gotta help me, because anybody who sees me is going to kill me, right, to get revenge for what I did. And so God puts the mark on him so nobody will mess with him. And then what does Cain do? Cain goes and he builds a city. The first one. He goes and builds a city. And when we read the lineage of Cain, what did we see? We had the two genealogies. Remember, we had the genealogy of Cain's descendants and the genealogy of Seth's, Adam and Eve's other sons' descendants. And all through the genealogy of Cain's descendants were the people who invented music, who invented metalsmithing, who invented, right, all the things of this world, all the technology, all the things of this world, all came from Cain's line in this city, right? What's the next place where we see a city in the book of Genesis? We have the story of Noah. No city really involved there. Next place we see a city is when the whole world has come together to do what? To build the Tower of Babel. Right? Tower of Babel. Babel being Babylon. Right? They come together to build this tower that's going to reach up to the heavens. Right? This great creation of mankind. Man's going to build his way up to God. Right? We're going to work our way up to God under our own steam, they thought. And how did God stop it?
Changed
The languages. Go back to verse 10 of Psalm 54. Drown them in the sea, O Lord, and divide their tongues.
Yeah. Changed
divide their tongues.
Divided their-
Right? This is that city. And we're going to see this city when we get into the New Testament. Right? And it's important that we have this idea. When we get into the New Testament, you're going to see these references to Babylon. And you're going to go, wait a minute, the Babylonian Empire hasn't existed for a long time. What are they talking about? They're under the Roman Empire. What are they talking about Rome? Right? You see Babylon over and over again, especially in the book of Revelation. Babylon is sort of this symbol of the city of man. And of what man creates and what man tries to do on his own. Right? This city. As opposed to the city of God. Right? That we see ultimately at the end of the book of Revelation that comes down out of heaven. Right? So this is prophetic symbolism. So this is going to be important, not just when we get to the New Testament in a couple of years, but in the next few months when we start getting into the prophetic books, this is going to be important too. Because, when the prophets are denouncing doom on Babylon, they're not just predicting that the Babylonian Empire is going to fall. They're talking about more than that. They're talking about more than that. So this is an important psalm for sort of defining that other half of what we talked about last week.
Are we trying to imitate God as in Switzerland? They're building this monstrous machine.
Well, the big particle accelerator to find a God particle.
Make us really flagged up. Gosh.
Are we approaching
That
that
question, billions of dollars on this now.
Herb's question, if you couldn't hear it over here, was he asked. He specifically mentioned the big particle collider they've got in Switzerland, where they're trying to discover the God particle, asking if this is a similar thing. This is a reality throughout human history. The reality throughout human history. That's why we see it again and again, all the way starting in Genesis, all the way to Revelation, right, in the scriptures, and all the way right up to our time. From the very beginning, since Satan first tried to set himself up as God, right, and then Adam decided to do what he wanted to do instead of what God told him to do. Right? Human beings have set themselves up and tried to put themselves in God's place. Right? And say, I now understand the universe, right? And control it, and I don't need God. Or I am a God. The Roman emperors all. And so, it's still happening now. It's still happening now. Both, political leaders like Kim Jong-il, or Kim Jong-un now, it's his son, and, Mao and his successors in China, politically, to various scientists who now claim we don't need God because we now understand everything. Humanity has it all together, across the board. There are human beings still trying to usurp God's place. And that's why we have to always keep in mind. And that's what St. Augustine, remember we talked about last time, when St. Augustine wrote City of God and talked about the city of God and the city of man, and kind of drew this out, it was because their empire, their whole civilization had collapsed. And they didn't know what they were going to do. And so St. Augustine comes to them and lovingly says, the reason you don't know what you're going to do now, that your civilization has collapsed, is that you were trusting in the wrong thing. You were trusting in your civilization. Right? You were trusting in Rome, and the glory of Rome, and Roman culture, and Roman intellect, and Roman technology. You thought that's what was going to keep you safe, and that's what was going to make your life worthwhile. It never was. If you really understand God, it doesn't matter if society collapses, because you're not putting your trust in society. You're putting your trust in God. And so, we're just as capable, you and I are just as capable of making that mistake today. Right? Putting our trust in our society, in our culture, in our government, in our, this is what's going to keep me secure. Right? So even if someday, the United States collapses all around us, if our trust and our hope is in God, it won't matter. If our trust and our hope is in these things that we human beings have created, then we're going to be in real trouble. Does anybody else have any questions before we? Okay. So Psalm 55, Orthodox Study Bible, 56 otherwise. Have mercy on me, O Lord, for man tramples me down. All day long he afflicts me in war. All day my enemies trample me down, for many are those who war against me from on high. I will not fear by day, but I will hope in you. I will praise God with my words all day long. In God I hope, I will not be afraid. What will flesh do to me? All day long they make my words repulsive. All their thoughts are against me for evil. They will dwell near and hide. They will watch my heel as they wait for my soul. In no way will you save them. In wrath you will bring down peoples, O God. I declare my life to you. You set my tears before you, as also in your promise. My enemies shall be turned back in whatever day I may call upon you. Behold, I know you are my God. In God I will praise his word. In the Lord I will praise his word. In God I hope, I will not be afraid. What will man do to me? In me, O God, are vows I will render in praise to you. For you delivered my soul from death and my feet from slipping, that I may be well-pleasing before God in the light of the living. You can remember this is the third of those psalms that's read at 6th hour in terms of Christ's crucifixion. It's also read in Holy Week. And the refrain, the important sort of unique refrain here is it's in both verse 5 and in verse 12, right? This, my hope is in God. Why will I fear what man or what flesh may do to me? Right? There's a saying from the church fathers that no one can harm a righteous man. Right? No one can harm a righteous man. Well, you look at it and they say, well, that's bull, because Jesus was a righteous man and they killed him, right? Right? So obviously you can harm a righteous man. And then the question is, did they really do him harm?
No.
They killed him.
He was preordained.
But he rose again from the dead.
Yeah.
Right? He laid down his life, he rose again from the dead, he rose again victorious. So who won? Jesus. He wasn't harmed. Quite the opposite. Right? And so when they say no one can harm a righteous man, it's because they have an understanding of what harm is. Right? Christ says, do not fear the one who can kill the body. Right? Fear the one who can cast you, both body and soul, into Hades. Who's that?
The devil.
No, God.
Oh, yeah. And ourselves.
God.
We can go down that road.
Our sinfulness, right? The devil doesn't judge us, right? It's Christ who's going to judge us, right? So we should have the fear of God, not be afraid of him, but the fear of God. We should worry about what God thinks of us. We should worry about pleasing God. But if we're pleasing to God, what can human beings do to us? If worst they can do is kill us, and then what happens?
We go to heaven.
We're with Christ. Right? If they make us suffer for Christ, right? That's more rewards for us when we're with Christ.
Question on that. We're here in church and old boy walks in and blows about half of us up. Those people get to go to heaven because they didn't do that. The man showed up to kill us all.
That's not my decision.
Oh, okay.
God judges everyone, because God knows their heart. I don't claim to. Yeah. So, but that's the key. The key is how our heart is before God. As long as our heart is pure before God, then no one could really harm us. This is why in the story of, we refer to this over and over again, twice every Matins in the canon. The story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. The three U's, the three holy Utes, here further east. Who, they were thrown in the fiery furnace, but part of that story, and we'll get to it here when we get to Daniel in a year and a half or so. The part of the story is before Nebuchadnezzar goes, they've refused to worship this idol, the statue of Nebuchadnezzar that he built himself and commanded everyone to worship. They refused to worship it. And so he stokes up this furnace and he's going to throw them in to burn them to death. Right? And what they say to him is, we know that our God can deliver us and protect us even from this furnace. But even if he doesn't, right? Even if you throw us in there and we're just incinerated, that's all that happens. Even if he doesn't, we will still worship and praise him and not you. Right? Because they had that understanding. Now we know ultimately God delivered them through the fire. But they had that understanding that, you know what? Even if they throw us in there and we're incinerated, you haven't really done us any harm. Right? Because our hearts are pure before God. Okay. Any other questions? Yeah.
In King James on verse 8,
Yeah.
it says, God keeps your tears in a bottle, and are they not in thy book? So is that just sort of like a metaphor or something?
Well, that's in verse 9. It's verse 9 in the Orthodox Study Bible translated as, I declare my life to you, you set my tears before you as also in your promise. And that's referring to the fact that God is aware when his people are suffering. It's not that he's busy somewhere. Right? Like remember the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel when they were trying to get Baal to set the sacrifice on fire, and of course there was no Baal, so nothing was happening. Elijah taunted them and said maybe he's in the bathroom or taking a nap or something. Why don't you yell louder and get his attention? Right? It's not that when we're suffering or bad things are happening to us, it's not that God is on vacation and when he gets back he'll take care of it, right? He knows. He knows. That's what it's trying to say. He's aware of our tears. He knows the things that we've suffered. So Psalm 56, Orthodox Study Bible 57 otherwise. Have mercy on me, O God, have mercy on me. For my soul trusts in you, and in the shadow of your wings I will hope, until lawlessness shall pass away. I will cry out to God Most High, my God who is my benefactor. He sent from heaven and saved me. He gave over to disgrace those who trample me down. God sent out his mercy and his truth and delivered my soul from the midst of young lions. Although troubled, I fell asleep. As for the sons of men, their teeth are a weapon and arrows, and their tongue is a sharp dagger. Be exalted, O God, above the heavens, and your glory above all the earth. They prepared a trap for my feet, and they bowed down my soul. They dug a pit before my face, but they fell into it. My heart is ready, O God, my heart is ready. I will sing, and I will sing a psalm. Awake, my glory, awake, harp and lyre. I will arise at dawn. I will give thanks to you, O Lord, among the peoples. I will sing to you among the Gentiles. For your mercy is magnified to the heavens, and your truth to the clouds. Be exalted, O God, above the heavens, and your glory above all the earth. Okay. So Psalm 56, that verse, be thou exalted, O God, above the heavens, and thy glory above all the earth, is what is said at the end of the liturgy. Most of you probably never heard this, but at the end of the liturgy, after everyone's received the Eucharist, has received communion, and the priest takes the chalice and everything what's left and brings it back over to the prothesis table. And after it's set down there, the priest senses it and quotes that, be exalted, O God, above the heavens, and your glory above all the earth. Okay? And it's referring to this psalm because this psalm, the end of it particularly, refers to sort of the completion of God's work. Right? It begins with verse 4, he sent from heaven and saved me. Right? God came out of his heaven and saved me. Right? And how in verse 9, awake my glory, awake harp and lyre, I will arise at dawn. Give thanks to you, O Lord, among the peoples. I will sing to you among the Gentiles. Right? Say that's referring to Christ's resurrection. Right? And then the gospel going out to all the Gentiles. So this is a psalm sort of talking about the completion of God's work of salvation. This falls into that category of praising Him for the things He's done. Right? And so that's why we quote this verse at the end of the liturgy. You know, sort of as things are done, as things are brought to completion. It has that sense. Okay. And again, in verse 10, just to point it out again, that, and we're going to see this more in the prophets over the next year or so, that all through the Old Testament, it is prophesied again and again and again that the worship of God is going to go out to the Gentiles. Right? It's going to go out to the Gentiles. Over and over and over again. So St. Paul, you get this thing now where everybody says St. Paul created Christianity. St. Paul created this new religion. Okay? No, he didn't. He read the Old Testament. Like a good rabbi. Right? And once Christ appeared to him, St. Paul understood, oh, this is where we're at in history, right? Christ has risen. What's the next step? Verse 9, I'll arise at dawn. Verse 10, I'll give thanks to you among the peoples. I will sing to you among the Gentiles. Right? Next step is, now the Gentiles are going to be welcomed into God's covenant. Okay? And this is what he's saying when we get into Romans chapter 10. This is what he's saying the Jews have missed out on. Right? Because they missed that Jesus was the Messiah, they didn't understand what St. Paul was doing. Right? They didn't know where in history they were. They were still sitting around waiting for the Messiah to come. Right? We're past that, guys. Right? And one of the interesting things is, this is pretty much dropped out of modern Judaism. There is no, even among the groups that are still at, some Jewish groups aren't even looking for a Messiah anymore. They interpret it figuratively. Right? But even the ones who are looking for an individual Messiah to come, there's none of this Gentile stuff.
Yeah, how do they?
It's just,
They didn't
I mean,
print
how
that
do
in
they
their book.
explain that?
it's just,
How do they explain that?
it's just not part of their theological worldview. It's not, you know.
They just think they're the chosen
That
people.
right, that their religion is the gift of God to them.
And nobody else.
And that's it, yeah.
Kind of like Muhammad to the Muslims.
Or to the Arabs, yeah.
To the Arabs.
Yeah. So it's for them. So on the one hand, they don't go around proselytizing. They don't go around trying to convert people to Judaism, right? Because why bother, right? It's for them, right? They don't try to make other people follow Jewish laws because that's for them. But they've also missed out on the fact that, as we've seen over and over and over again as we've been going through the Old Testament, God is not just the God of Israel, He's the God of the whole world. Right? And that even when He picked that one nation, He picked that one nation to be example to all the other nations. So that all the other nations, their neighbors, would see who God was. It was never just an end in itself. Just like, I like you guys better than all the other guys. Right? It was never about that.
That's the way they think.
Yeah. Yeah. But I'm just trying to point out, we're reading the Old Testament. That's not what it says. This is their Bible.
Well, parts of it anyway.
But even the parts we agree on seem to say.
Didn't they basically reject all of it except the first 5 books now?
No, it depends. It depends. But for the most part, no, they accept. They accept 39 books, the ones that are in the King James Old Testament. Officially, at least.
Psalms we do during Holy Week, we talk about enemies laying a snare and being in the pit.
And then falling into it?
Is that just like the city of the living?
Well, no, that's making an important point about sin. That's making an important point about sin. We go out, we get angry at someone or resentful towards someone or bitter towards someone or just straight out hate someone, right? And we set out to go and do evil to them and destroy them, right? And so what this is saying, sort of the example they give is, you go out and dig a pit, so this guy will fall into the pit and get injured or die, and you end up being the one who falls into it. So the idea is that it's the person who sets out to do the evil to the other person is the one who ends up being destroyed, not the innocent person who's being attacked. All right, so that's that idea. So we'll see a lot of that. They'll set a snare and be trapped by their own, right? And that is, frankly, how sin. We've talked again. The reason God doesn't want us to sin is that it just will destroy us. That He doesn't want to see us perish. All right. So we set out and we have whatever plans we may have made, and however we think we're going to get away with it, it's going to be okay or whatever. But what ends up happening is that we end up being the ones who suffer. One of the most basic examples of that is when we're angry and hold a grudge against someone. When you're angry and hold a grudge against someone, 9 times out of 10, the person you hate so much and you're so angry at doesn't even know.
And don't care.
And doesn't care if they do know. Right? So you hate this person, and this person's going through their life perfectly happy. Meanwhile, you're sitting there full of hate and bitterness and anger, not enjoying your life at all. Right? Ruining your own life because you're mad at this other person. Right? So you're so mad at them that you're hurting yourself. Makes no sense when you look at it from outside. But we do it all the time. We do it all the time toward other people. But that's a real basic example. We set out, we're angry at someone else, and we only end up hurting ourselves. We dig the pit and then we fall into it. That's the...
Sometimes it's deep.
Yeah. Okay. So Psalm 57, Orthodox Study Bible, 58 otherwise. If then you truly speak of righteousness, do you judge rightly, O you sons of men? For in your heart you work lawlessness in the earth. Your hands weave unrighteousness. Sinners are alienated from the womb. From birth they are led astray, they speak lies. Their anger is according to the likeness of a serpent, like a deaf asp that stops its ears, which will not listen to the sound of charms, nor to an enchantment of a skillful charmer. God shattered their teeth in their mouths, the Lord broke the teeth of the lions. They shall pass along like water running through. He will bend his bow until they are weakened. Like melting wax they will be destroyed. Fire fell on them and they never saw the sun. Before your thorns are aware of its prickly shrub, he will swallow you up as if you were alive, as if in his anger. The righteous man shall be glad when he sees the vengeance of the ungodly. He shall wash his hands in the blood of the sinner. A man will say, if indeed there is fruit for the righteous man, then it is God who judges them on the earth. This is one of those to scare you out of.
This is what?
One of those ones to scare you out of sinning.
You scared the hell out of you?
Yeah, literally. Yeah. Or scare you out of hell, hopefully. So that it starts with this rhetorical question. Right? And we're going to see that as we get into Proverbs, the other wisdom literature. A lot of these rhetorical questions, where sometimes God will even introduce it with, come let us reason together. Like, let's sit down and have a talk. Right? He starts off, if then you truly speak of righteousness. Right? So he's saying, you human beings, you talk about righteousness and justice. Right? You talk about that a lot. He says, do you judge rightly? Right? You talk about justice, but what do you do? Right? What do you do when you go out and make justice? Verse 3, for in your heart you work lawlessness in the earth. Your hands weave unrighteousness. Right? It gives this example that, in their anger, they're like a deaf asp. Right? meaning they're just out to bite, right? And it gives this example, they've stopped at their, no, snakes don't have ears technically, but it's a picture. So the snake, a snake charmer can't charm him, right? You can't play a flute or something to try to charm the snake because it's deaf, right? It's just there to bite. There's no way you could stop it, right? So he's giving this example that sinners are, it's not just, again, that we accidentally do evil. We're determined. We're determined to go and do evil, right? Even if people try to talk us down, talk us out of it, we push on through past all barriers to commit the sin we want to commit, right? And then it talks about the ultimate consequences of our sins with a lot of graphic allusions, like having our teeth broken, which is one of the most, for me at least, that's one of those images that gives me the heebie-jeebies. Having all your teeth broken, but or melting like wax, which always reminds me of the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark. Right? Or this prickly, this thorny shrub bush, that gets burnt up, right? That gets just incinerated and ceases to exist. Right?
Fire fell on them and they never saw the sun.
Yeah.
You can't even see the fire.
So this is all talking about, again, we've talked before, it's not just a question of, as we see in the wisdom literature, there's these two ways, one that leads to God and one that leads somewhere else. That somewhere else is destruction. Make no mistake, we've talked a lot about hell and how hell isn't God punishing you for eternity, that hell is something we choose ourselves, and hell being, these other things. But that isn't to minimize hell. That isn't to try to soft pedal hell. Like, those Orthodox, they don't think hell's that bad. No, hell's bad. Our destruction is bad, right? So we need these kind of images, because it's actually so horrible that it can't be explained. All these examples of being in the outer darkness and weeping and gnashing of teeth and being thrown into a lake of fire and melting like wax and having all your teeth shattered, the truth of how horrible it is beyond our comprehension. Right? So all of these images are just sort of the most horrible images that the authors can muster to try to warn us away from it. Right? Because our sin, when we commit it, nobody would choose, yes, I'd like to have all my teeth shattered. Right? Yes, I'd like to be cast into outer darkness where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. Right? No one chooses that. Right? Except every time we sin, that's exactly what we're choosing. Because that's where it leads. Right? That's where it leads. So you can't get on the toll road and then claim when you get to the toll booth that you didn't know where you were. Right? It's where the road leads. Have you tried that ever? I don't think it works.
What about verse 11? The righteous man will be glad.
He washes hands in the blood of right. Remember we talked about how justice is distributed. Right, things are out of whack. Right. So in this world, there are righteous people who are suffering, and wicked people who seem to be doing pretty good for themselves. Right? So the idea is that when God comes, He corrects that. Right? That's justice. Right? Remember how this psalm starts. You talk about justice. Right? You say you want justice. Well, here's what justice means. It means you paying this price for your wickedness. Right? And so that the righteous man who's suffering, he gets lifted up. Right? The wicked man who's prospering gets put down. The righteous man gets lifted up. That's what that's alluding to. Right?
I'm washing my hands and while the sinner is righteous.
Well, it's a picture. It's a picture.
In my Bible, it's their feet.
Wash their feet. The idea is that again, this is another one of those horrible images of what happens to the sinner. is that the blood is pouring out. And we're going to see this again in the book of Revelation where they talk about these torrents of blood that come up to a horse's bridle and stuff. The idea is that there's so much blood that you can wash your hands or it's covering your feet, right? So again, it's a picture of this horrible fate that awaits the people who do wickedness. Again, because it's trying to point out, you're putting a foot on this road and those first few steps don't seem so bad, but here's where it leads. Right? And if you really understand where this leads, you'll get off this path real quick, right? And start heading in the other direction. So Psalm 58, Orthodox Study Bible, 59 otherwise. Rescue me from my enemies, O God, and redeem me from those who rise up against me. Deliver me from the workers of lawlessness and save me from men of blood. For behold, they hunt for my soul, mighty men set upon me. Neither is it for my lawlessness nor for my sin, O Lord. I run without lawlessness and keep a straight path. Rise up and meet me and see. And you, O Lord God of hosts, the God of Israel, give heed and examine all the Gentiles. Do not be merciful to all who work lawlessness. They shall return at evening and hunger like dogs, and they shall encircle the city. Behold, they shall speak with their mouth, and a sword is in their lips. For they say, who hears? But you, O Lord, shall laugh at them. You shall hold all the nations in contempt. O my strength, I shall keep watch with you, for you are my protector, O God. As for my God, his mercy shall go before me. God will show it to me among my enemies. Do not kill them, lest they forget my people. Scatter them by your power and bring them down, O Lord, my protector. For the sin of their mouth, for the word of their lips, let them also be taken in their arrogance. And from their vow of evil and lie, their end will be proclaimed. In a wrath of destruction, and let them be no more. And they shall know God is Jacob's Lord, and the Lord of the ends of the earth. They shall return at evening and hunger like dogs, and they shall encircle the city. They shall be scattered to and fro so as to eat. And if they are not satisfied, they shall also grumble. But I will sing of your power and greatly rejoice in your mercy in the morning. For you are my protector and my refuge in the day of my affliction. You are my helper, I will sing to you. For you, O God, are my protector. You are my mercy, O my God. Okay. So this is another one of those psalms. These are similar themes that we've had several times tonight. Right? This is another one of those psalms that points to Christ and those who sought after his life. Notice this picture of those going against this sort of pack of dogs circling around, right, trying to destroy them. And note what's interesting. The verse 12: "Do not kill them, lest they forget my people. Scatter them by your power and bring them down." So this idea is that scatter this pack, but don't kill them. Why? Why?
Sin, their sins beyond them.
Well, their sin is other, but why not destroy them for it? Look at verse 14. "And they shall know God is Jacob's Lord and the Lord of the ends of the earth." Right? Because if you kill them, they can't learn anything. Kill them, they can't learn anything. Right? So this prayer isn't destroy all these enemies, but by delivering, right, we're saying this is a prayer of Christ, right? So by delivering Christ, right, by raising him from the dead, so he can, as it says in verse 17, rejoice in his mercy in the morning. What is he doing? He's showing those who killed Christ who he is. Right? He's displaying who he is. Okay. So the goal here, even here, isn't for these evil people to get what's coming to them. It's that they would see God's mercy and they would turn and realize who the Lord is, right? And again, we have these two pieces that we've been talking about. He's Jacob's Lord and the Lord of the ends of the earth, right? He's Israel's God and the God of the whole world. So it's not just, it's the Romans too, right? of the people who killed Jesus. Who was it? Sanhedrin, the leaders of Israel, the Gentiles, the Romans. Right? So Christ's resurrection is for both to see. Right? Who is Lord. So Psalm 59, Orthodox Study Bible, 60 otherwise. O God, you drove us off and destroyed us. You were angry and had mercy on us. You made the earth quake and you troubled it. Repair its ruins, for it was shaken. You showed your people difficult things. You made us drink the wine of bewilderment. You gave a sign to those who fear you, so they may flee from the face of the bow. That your beloved may be rescued. Save with your right hand and hear me. God spoke in his holy place. I will greatly rejoice and divide Shechem, and I will measure out the valley of the tabernacles. Gilead is mine, and Manasseh is mine, and Ephraim is the strength of my head. Judah is my king. I'm going to retranslate this next verse because the Orthodox Study Bible did a lousy job. Moab is my washpot. Over Edom I will extend my shoe. Foreign tribes were subjected to me. Who will bring me into a fortified city? Who will lead me as far as Edom? Will not you, O God, who drove us away? And will not you, O God, go out with our armies? Give us help from affliction, for the salvation of man is useless. But in God we shall work power, and he will utterly scorn those who afflict us. The reason I retranslated that is because they wimped out. Even washpot is wimping out. I don't know what a cauldron of hope is. Even washpot is whipping out a little, because the washpot I'm referring to, they didn't have flush toilets in David's time. So you had a chamber pot. In which you would relieve yourself. Okay? So this is God doing a little bit of smack talk. Okay? So what it literally says is, Moab is my toilet, if you want to be really... Moab is my toilet, that over Edom I will extend my shoe, is more like I will wipe my shoes on Edom. Right? And if you know anything about Middle Eastern cultures, and shoes, right? Coming and wiping your shoes on somebody is pretty much, it's a pretty big sign of disrespect, right? So, that's what it actually says. Right? So there's a contrast here between Israel, right? These tribes. Gilead is mine, Manasseh is mine, Ephraim is the strength of my head, Judah is my king, right? In Israel, on the contrary, Moab, right, is my toilet, and Edom, I wipe my shoes on them, right? Because they're Israel's enemies. They're Israel's enemies. Now, what's interesting is David writes this, right? Moab and Edom were not particularly, remember, David was mostly fighting the Philistines. He wasn't really concerned with fighting Moab and Edom that much. He got into a little bit of Edom. Right? But notice how the psalm starts. Oh God, you drove us off and destroyed us. You were angry and then had mercy on us. Made the earth quake and you troubled it. Repair its ruins, for it was shaken. Right, and then it talks about, verse 5, you made us drink the wine of bewilderment. What does that sound like it's talking about?
The Exodus.
Well, the exile. The exile.
The exile, because it's
right?
driving them out.
The ruins of Jerusalem.
Yeah.
Right? You drove us out, but then had mercy on us. Right?
For the end, for things that have to be changed.
And you'll see, yeah, you'll see. So this isn't just David talking smack on the countries he doesn't like and putting words in God's mouth. Right? This is prophetic, and you'll see when we get into the book of Ezekiel, especially, right, that at the time, and this is reflected in a couple other psalms, at the time that the people of Judah were taken into exile by Nebuchadnezzar, it was precisely the Moabites and the Edomites who basically betrayed them, turned on them, and mocked them as they were getting taken into exile.
Hauled off.
Right. Okay. And so this part that God is saying is prophetic too. It's prophetic too. Moab and Edom at that time, they had cut deals with Babylon to basically become vassals. Right? They said, we'll become your servants, Nebuchadnezzar, no need to conquer us. Right? We'll pay you tribute. Right? And then scoffed at Judah for getting wiped out. You know, the dummies. Right? They should have done what we did and become vassals, right? And so God is saying, you guys think you've got it squared away, but these people you're laughing at who are getting taken into exile, these people are precious to me. And you're pretty much the opposite, right? I mean, toilet and wiping your feet. That's pretty much the opposite of precious, right? That's like the other end of the... Right? So when the time comes and there's a reckoning, you're better to be with Judah, with these people going into exile, than our friends Moab and Edom. Yeah. Okay. And so what was really interesting, just a brief anecdote, is that in the Western Rite, the Orthodox Western Rite, they go through at their Vesper services, they cycle through the whole Psalter. They do a couple psalms in every one, and they just sort of rotate through. Whereas we have fixed psalms. You know, we have certain psalms we do in certain services. So at one of the clergy retreats, we had Vespers, and they did Western Rite Vespers. And this psalm was one of the psalms they did. Right? And they did it sort of Gregorian chant style, but they actually translated it chamber pot. So it was just kind of funny to hear them sing, you know, Moab is my chamber pot.
I would change the melody.
Okay. It was just kind of a... Okay.
Tell me monks don't have
Okay, so Psalm 60, Orthodox Study Bible, 61 otherwise. Hear my supplication, O God, attend to my prayer. From the end of the earth I cried out to you. When my heart was discouraged, you lifted me high on a rock. You guided me, for you became my hope, a tower of strength from the face of the enemy. I will dwell in your tabernacle unto the ages. I will be covered with the shelter of your wings. For you, O God, hear my prayers. You give an inheritance to those who fear your name. You will add days to the days of the king, his years as the days of generation to generation. You will abide before God forever. Who will seek out his mercy and truth? So I will sing praise to your name unto ages of ages, that I may pay my vows day to day. So there's two pieces here. Sort of the first half and the second half. The first half is some themes we saw much earlier in the Psalter. This idea of living with God forever on his holy mountain, in his presence. We see the tabernacle theme again coming up. And remember we talked about the shelter of the wings doesn't mean that God has big bird wings. Right? It's using this image of a mother bird who shelters its young. And specifically in this case, because it comes right after a reference to the tabernacle, what does it make us think of? The Ark of the Covenant, right? That was in the holy place of the tabernacle. And the Holy of Holies, the most holy place, was on top of the Ark of the Covenant, where the two cherubim had their wings, remember, extended to cover, and that's where the blood was placed on the Day of Atonement. It was there on the mercy seat, under the wings, right? So this is speaking even more particularly of being not just with God, but being there at sort of the center of God's mercy and his compassion for us. Right? And then the second part is talking about someone else who's going to be in the presence of God forever. And that's the king. Now, David wrote this, but he's talking about the king. Right? Is he talking about himself? No. I would say no, since it's in the third person. Right? So it's referring to the king. Right? You add days to the days of the king. He will abide before God forever. Who will seek out his mercy and truth. It's really not speaking about himself. Right? He's talking about the Messiah.
Why didn't they?
The king who's going to come.
Why didn't they capitalize
I would have.
I just do.
Okay. That's- okay.
Typo.
So, Psalm 61, Orthodox Study Bible, 62 otherwise. Shall not my soul be submissive to God? For from him is my salvation. For he is my God and my Savior, my protector, I shall be shaken no more. How long will you attack a man? All of you murder him. You attack him as you would a leaning wall and a broken hedge. They also planned to remove my honor. They ran with a lie. They blessed with their mouth and they cursed with their heart. However, be submissive to God, O my soul, for my patient endurance is from him. For he is my God and my Savior, my protector, I shall never be moved. And God is my salvation and my glory. He is the God of my help, and my hope is in God. Hope in him, all you congregation of people. Pour out your hearts before him. God is our helper. But the sons of men are useless. The sons of men are liars with the yokes of wrongdoing. They are altogether useless. Do not hope in wrongdoing, and do not hunger for booty. If riches flow in, do not set your heart on them. God spoke once, I heard these two things, that power is of God, and to you, O Lord, is mercy. For you will repay every man according to his works. So there's a contrast here between what's repeated twice in verse 2 and then again in verse 6. This, be submissive to God, O my soul. Or how will my soul not be submissive to God? Right? And that's talking about obedience, which I talked about a few weeks ago when I preached. Obedience isn't a concept we really like. We like to sort of do our own thing. You know, we try to find out what a sin is, and then, okay, these things are sins, so I'll try to avoid doing those, and then I'll go out and do what I want. Right? And that's not really the way it's presented to us in the Scriptures. The way it's presented to us in the Scriptures is that we need to be submissive and obedient to God, meaning we need to go where God wants us to go and do what God wants us to do, not just try to avoid breaking any rules while we do whatever we want. Two very different concepts. But what's contrasted here is between this obedience and submissiveness to God, right, and obeying and following the sons of men, right, here at the end. The sons of men who are useless, who are liars with the yokes of wrongdoing, right? Do not hope in wrongdoing. Right, we saw in the first section, in verse 9, hope in him, all you congregations of people. Pour out your hearts before him. God is our helper. Right? The reason why we obey God is because our hope is in him. Because when the day comes, as it says in the very last verse at the end, when we're judged and God repays everyone according to his works, our hope is in God and in his mercy. Our hope isn't in men and what they could do for us, or verse 11, in riches, in wealth. That's not what our hope is in. Our hope is in God, and so we obey him rather than following after where men may go. And that's why I heard these two things, that power is of God, and to you, O Lord, is mercy. God is powerful, men aren't really. Right? Men may promise you a lot of things, but in the end they can't deliver. Whereas God can. And it's in the Lord that there's mercy. You're not going to find mercy with men. And so verse 11 also is a good verse in terms of, we've talked a lot about wealth gets a pretty bad rap in the Bible. Right, on the whole. It's always talking about not trusting in riches. Easier for a rich man, or for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. Woe to you who are rich in Luke. Wealth gets kind of a bad name. What's interesting here is if riches flow in, right? So if it happens that God blesses you with wealth, what are we to do? Is that bad? Right? Is it, oh no, I got rich, now I'm going to hell? What did I do wrong? No, if riches flow in, do not set your heart on them. Right? The issue isn't with having the riches, the issue is with trusting. Putting your faith and your trust and your hope in those riches. Like, that's going to get you somewhere.
That is bigger. Do not
hunger for booty.
Right.
It doesn't say how much booty you have, how much you
Do not go out looking for it. Yeah.
Is that
Yeah.
a reference to money?
Booty? Yeah. It's it's ill-gotten gain. Yeah, it's pirate booty. I don't know why they chose the word. Maybe it was Talk Like a Pirate Day when they did the translation. But yours doesn't have booty? What does it have?
Press not in oppression, lead them not being robbed of riches.
Okay, yeah, robbery, like pirate booty. Robbery is probably a more common.
First pirates are probably kind of ambivalent about what they were after, too.
Well, it's same idea, right? Right, that we're not to be out there trying to get money by whatever means necessary, right? As if that's going to somehow, as if once we've got it, we're going to be secure, right? Because, you know, as God said to the man who stored up all the grain, remember, and he built bigger barns so he could store even more grain, and then he said, well, now I'm set for life. Now I can relax. And God said, you fool, you're going to die tonight. Good job storing up all that grain, right? So, it's the same idea, right? Okay. So one more. We'll get through 12. Feels good. Psalm 62. And this psalm you may recognize because this is one of the 6 psalms that we read before Matins. O God, my God, I rise early to be with you. My soul thirsts for you. How often my flesh thirsts for you in a desolate, impassable, and waterless land. So in the holy place I appear before you to see your power and your glory. Because your mercy is better than life, my lips shall praise you. Thus I will bless you in my life. I will lift up my hands in your name. May my soul be filled as with marrow and fatness. My mouth shall sing praise to you with lips filled with rejoicing. If I remembered you on my bed, I meditated on you at daybreak. For you are my helper, and in the shelter of your wings I will greatly rejoice. My soul follows close behind you. Your right hand takes hold of me. But they seek for my soul in vain. They shall go into the lower parts of the earth. They shall be given over to the edge of the sword. They shall be a portion for foxes. But the king shall be glad in God. All who swear by him shall be praised. For the mouth that speaks unrighteous things is stopped. So the first part is an important reflection on. Now we're told this was written by David when he was in the desert of Judea. We get this kind of desert imagery at the beginning, right? Where he talks about wanting to be in the presence of God, like being out in the desert and being thirsty, right? You know, that it's easy, like it being in a dry and thirsty land. You're out in the desert, you crave water. That's how much he craves to be with God, right? And to be honest, a lot of the time, when it comes time for me to say some prayers, I don't feel like a parched man in the desert, desperate, right? In fact, sometimes if they're the evening prayers, I'm starting to nod off. You know? A couple of times, maybe even by way of confession, I haven't made it all the way through right before I passed out. Right? So this is how we should. This is how we should feel about God. Right? It's a sign of our sinfulness that the fact that God isn't present with us and that we're not close with Him doesn't bother us all that much. Right? That we don't really feel it. I mean, one of the big examples of the opposite would be Saint Seraphim of Sarov. It was the Russian saint who at one point was given the vision of Christ himself in his uncreated glory. And then at a certain point in his spiritual life, God drew away from him. And he wasn't exactly sure why. But he went out and spent 100 days on a rock. And when I say 100 days on a rock, I mean he was just out on the rock. And when he was conscious, he was praying. And when it rained, he didn't leave the rock. And when it snowed, he didn't leave the rock. He was out there on the rock praying for 100 days, day and night, whenever he was awake, until he felt that God had drawn close to him again. Right? That's how much he noticed and how desperate he was to have the relationship he had had with God back. Right? I definitely can't say that for myself. But this is the picture of someone who has David, who had at one point in his life drawn very close to God, and now is feeling far away. But notice also, verse 3, so in the holy place I appear before you to see your power and your glory. Right? Where is David suggesting that we go?
To church.
Right. That's why we pray, one of the reasons we pray this psalm before Mass. Right? Because it's reminding us, this is why we should be here. This is why we should be coming to Matins and then afterwards liturgy. Right? Because we're hungry and thirsty for God. And because this is the place. This is the place where He's going to manifest His power and His glory to us. And so that verse 5, this I will bless you and I will lift up my hands. That's referring to prayer. Right? And so, and in verse 6, he says, may my soul be filled as if with marrow and fatness. Right? Now, me personally, my dogs love bone marrow and gristle. If I fed them nothing but marrow and fat, they'd be very happy dogs. Us, not so much. But this is, the richest part of the meat. So it's not just, so when we come to God and we hunger and thirst for Him, those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, right? When we come to Him, it's not just that, He gives us some drops of water to cool our parched tongue, right? He doesn't just give us a little, He gives us more than we could ask for. Right? When we come before Him, hungering and thirsting. He fills us, and He doesn't just fill us up, but He fills us up with the richest and the best, that there is. There is. And this speaks to the fact that we as human beings, as I said, it's part of our sinfulness that we don't realize how far God has gotten away from us. But we tend to, rather than come before God, we definitely don't go out on a rock for 100 days, but rather than even coming to church and trying to draw closer to God, we tend to try to fill that with something else. Right? We tend to try to come and say, well, I'll just keep myself busy. Right? We feel despair, we feel humiliation, we feel depression, and rather than trying to draw closer to God, we say, well, get me a stiff drink. Well, I'll go out and just distract myself. Get me 80 more DVDs that I could watch in a row. Let me surf the internet until 4 in the morning when I pass out. Try and find something to distract us and to fulfill that, right? And it's like we're trying to fill ourselves up with saltine crackers because we're so hungry. When God is waiting to give us the marrow and the fatness, God is waiting to give us the richness and the fullness of who He is, right? That will really fill us up, really satisfy us, really fill us with joy, the joy of His salvation. So we sing praises to Him, right? He's got that on offer to fill us up. So we don't need to go and try and find some substitute to take away the hunger pangs. Okay. Does anybody have any questions? I think we'll leave off there. People can hear most of the Ancient Faith Radio thing. And then watch the new episode of Breaking Bad.
Never watched an episode. I've seen the real thing.
That's
Well, full of TV. You can go around Charleston and see them people walking
true.
around here.
Okay. So does anybody have any other questions before we... Okay, thank you everybody.